Hello, lab teachers, and welcome to Learning is Not Quiet presents the toilet paper test. Today, I am going to talk about the do's and don'ts of this particular product found on my Teachers Pay Teachers store. As always, if you're interested in this product and you found this video on YouTube, links are in the description. Remember, if you're on Teachers Pay Teachers, to search for Learning is Not Quiet, because it isn't. Let's get started. So with all of my experiments that I sell on my store, just as a brief note, they are included in one product: English, Spanish, as well as different differentiations for students to use. I also do this for a lot of my products that I have, especially science, because I feel that teachers shouldn't have to spend their whole lives differentiating. It should already be there for you. So that's why I have done that. I really believe in differentiation. If you do too, you will love all of the products on my store, pretty much. All right, so how I start this is I first go over the question, and any science experiment that's found in my store is going to follow the same basic format because I really believe in teaching to the scientific method and getting that in students' brains over and over and over again so they feel very comfortable talking about and experiencing the language of science. I used to do more of like displays or have students, kind of watch me do the experiment, and I would skip over some of this stuff. And then I realized that by putting variables and data and making students really think through the scientific process, it was so much more meaningful to them. They did better on their standardized tests at the end of the year, and they just felt more confident and competent as scientists. So I start with a question, and this particular question is, which brand of toilet paper will hold a penny the longest as we keep adding water drops to the toilet paper? Okay, so for this lab experiment, what you're going to need is a bunch of different brands of toilet paper. Now, I realize I'm saying this in the middle of a pandemic where toilet paper is a little bit scarce, but when I was doing this lab this year, earlier, I had students, I just said, bring in, as part of their homework, I said, bring in 5 squares of toilet paper from your house and write a note what the brand is on it. That's all I told students to do. I ended up with way more toilet paper than I needed. You as the teacher do not need to go out and purchase toilet paper. I would ask the custodian for some of the school toilet paper because usually that's the really, really cheapy stuff, and that's an interesting one that contrasts with what students are using at home. But it's really fun to have a bunch of different brands, and students love to take a little bit of toilet paper from their bathroom, and they love telling their parents, "Oh my God, this is my homework tonight. I had to get some toilet paper." Oftentimes, parents will just send in a whole roll of toilet paper, which is great because several students will inevitably forget. I also usually bring a roll from my house just in case we need it. But again, you do not need students to bring in a whole roll. I just have them bring in a couple of squares and to write a note of the brand on it. The other thing you're going to need is some pipettes. I buy a bunch of pipettes from Amazon, and then I just really reuse them over and over again. They're not the kind of thing you need to dispose of. I have also gotten pipettes from a doctor's office when I was really in a clutch situation and needed them, and walked up to the doctor's office and said, "Hey, I'm a science teacher. Do you have any of these?" And they were very nice and let me have them. I also bring in pennies. Very important, you can use any coin as long as it's consistent. So say you're going through your change in the wallet the morning of the lab and you don't have any pennies, quarters will work fine. Just have students cross it off and emphasize to them, it doesn't really matter what the penny or coin is. What's important is that it's the same, right? That it's a control or constant in our experiment. Okay, so once we've established the question, we then move on to the hypothesis. This is kind of the mid-level hypothesis. So I predict that blank brand of toilet paper will hold the pennies the longest because for the more advanced version, I have students use if then, and obviously for a more differentiated version, I have students just circle what they think the certain number will be. Okay. Then we move on to variables and data. Very important not to skimp on this part of the scientific method. I have students identify independent, dependent constants, sometimes control group, and data type. Note that I also have a version with sentence stems and without the control group to make it a little bit easier for students. So here are the answers. Very important that the independent variable is the brand of toilet paper and the dependent variable is the number of drops that that paper can hold. Said it before, I'll say it again. So important to hit that language of science. So important for students to feel really comfortable with it. Okay, another common question I get from students at this point is, up to this point in the school year, we've only done quantitative or numerically based experiments. And sometimes they'll ask that question, well, like, what would a qualitative experiment look like? And I try to help them understand that. And we also kind of talk about at this point why quantitative data can be so valuable to scientists. That qualitative data can sometimes be subjective, right? What one person's experience or observation is might not be the same as another person's. Whereas if we're collecting numerical data, it's a lot easier to have a common basis of reality that we're all working from. So then I have students do the actual experiment. And for this, you says use a pipette or dropper while 2 students hold the ends of the toilet paper. So you basically need 3 students at all times to hold the end, and 1 person has the dropper in the middle, and you see how many drops of water you can add before the penny falls through. Now, because I'm still setting up expectations with students, I last year did this where I had students come to the back table with me, to my kidney table, and I had other students working on the PBL while I was doing this with them, reading, whatever else independent work I had them doing at their seats. That was really cool, but it took a really long time, obviously, because there's 4 trials and there's 4 brands of toilet paper. So that means you have to do this 16 times. So that took a really long time. I would recommend, just if you can with your students, have them doing it at their table and switching the roles. You might want to do the entire first brand of toilet paper that you bring from your house as a model first, so that you establish those expectations, and then allow them to do it in groups. It just really depends on what you have available, your timing, and how much hand-holding your students need through expectations, supplies, and the scientific method at this point in the year. Okay, so then for the conclusion, we write whether a hypothesis was verified or falsified. I have them find averages or means of these. Very important for me to include math concepts in my science time. That's how I get most bang for my buck. I always have them analyze the data, graph it, and then answer some questions that follow. Okay, so beyond this, some teacher notes are that there are several different versions of this available. Pretty much, like I said, with all of my lab experiments, I really believe in differentiation. If you do too, you will love the products found in my store. This is kind of the highest version. When I'm teaching middle school, when I have students who are pretty familiar with science, gifted and talented classes, I use this version. Where they can work pretty independently. They don't need sentence stems. I also have this version available in Espanol. This version is not for all students who speak Spanish. I just want to make that very clear. I really let students have some say in which version they want if they are a Spanish speaker. This is a great version to use with students who have been to a significant amount of schooling in their home country and they're pretty able to read independently in Spanish. But they might not be able to yet in English. So I've especially had students who are from Spanish-speaking countries, are gifted and talented, and really appreciate this time when they can continue learning in their home language. It also just shows them how much I value Spanish in my classroom, and I really emphasize the point that English isn't better than Spanish. I want you to be bilingual. I want you to know both, and I want you to be competent in both. So that's my kind of spiel on that one. This is what that looks like from a student perspective. In Spanish. And then this is a little bit easier version. If I have a class of students that's not very accustomed to using scientific language in my classroom, I use this version. This is also great for students who have mild to moderate disabilities, reading disabilities, or who are like 3+ ESOL and still need some sentence stems, still need just a little bit of support. This is what that looks like from a student perspective. And then finally, we have the easiest version. This is for students who are level 1 or 2 ESOL, also for students with pretty severe disabilities. And this is kind of what that looks like. This is the very first science experiment I did this past school year. And oh my gosh, it was just so much fun and so cool to do with students. My favorite story was I had one of my students with pretty severe disabilities who came to my back kidney table. You know, I pulled him over with his group and we were going to get ready to do the science experiment. And he sat down and told me to my face, he said, "I don't do this science stuff." And I was like, to him, I was like, why don't you do the science stuff? He's like, I just don't do the science stuff. And I think that was because he had never been really included in the scientific process. He had never been asked to participate himself, especially with a worksheet to follow along with, right? Being more than just the scientific helper and actually being asked to make a prediction before the scientific process started. And I was like, come on, man, you can do it. Just try it. Humor me. And so he did and had an amazing time. And this was like one of my favorite success stories, is that this student then throughout the rest of the year, anytime I was like, it's like experiment time, it's science time, they would just be so excited and be like, yeah. And they, by the end of the year, were saying things like, I'm a scientist, I love science. And that just makes this whole work so meaningful and so purposeful for me. So that's just one of my toilet paper test success stories. I hope you enjoyed this product. I hope that this helped answer any questions you might have, help you teach this a little bit easier. Feel free to just copy paste the link to this video in your lesson plans. Feel free to reach out to me on Teachers Pay Teachers. Remember, learning is not quiet. If you have any questions, I am always here to help you. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for teaching the next generation of scientists. Adios.